My first question for you is, you have studied anti-Semitism and the Holocaust your whole professional life. So I want to know, were you at all shocked or even surprised by the alarming surge in anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world in the immediate aftermath of October
As an
7th?
academic, I wasn't surprised because I've seen that before. As an American, as someone who's been studying this for so long and doing this work, I was shocked. So I wasn't surprised, but I was shocked that those two things can coexist. I use this term advisedly. It was a tsunami. It's a tsunami. And it's an organized effort in many places that we didn't anticipate, and that we were unprepared for. Now, what's very clear, and I hope you've seen the statement put out by the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, who used to live on the Upper West Side, and has a very interesting biography about foreign actors, and she particularly, you know the statement, right? She cited.
Yes, in fact, I was going to ask you about that for sure. Yes.
As ginning up, amplifying, I guess would be the better word, some of the stuff on campus, including funding some of it. That's not to suggest that there aren't people on campuses who feel very strongly about it, but in Atlanta, the Cop City people Atlanta Police Department is thinking of building this training grounds, which is being called Cop City, or by the opponents. And there are a lot of people who are very much opposed to it. And those people were a major part of the encampment there. So I'm not saying that, there isn't passionate feelings on the campus among students, whether they know the issue or not. But I am saying is that there are clearly outside influences who are amplifying this.
Let me ask you, you made an important statement that we were unprepared for this. And I think there are people out there who say all these organizations that their main mission is to fight anti-Semitism and discussion. So why were we unprepared?
I don't know. I think it's going to take a long term to unpack that. I think we were complacent. I think we weren't aware of some of the efforts that were being made. I think there were a lot of reasons. There were a lot of groups and entities and national entities that were unprepared on October 7th.
So how has the uptick in anti-Semitism in the United States impacted your message and approach to fighting anti-Semitism abroad?
In a number of ways. First of all, it added urgency. B, it brought us we were already part of a large international conversation. My remit is overseas because I'm in the State Department, but it brought us into the mainstream of what was going on in an even more definitive way than previously. So certainly in that respect, it amplified what I had been saying before October 7th. The fight against anti-Semitism has to be seen in a multi-tiered fashion. Bottom tier, I used to talk about three prongs, but in conversations with my wonderful team here at the State Department, we realized that a pitchfork, that each prong is separate, and this isn't. The three levels bleed into one into the other. Bottom level as a threat to the welfare of Jews in the Jewish community. Second level and Jewish institutions and those associated with the community. When I was in Argentina for the anniversary of the AMIA bombing, as you go into that commemoration, you're given a picture of one of the victims. So the first year that I was there, the picture I held up was of a young man who was not Jewish, but he had been in the building. His mother had come to the Jewish Community Center to be trained as to take a course on being a home health care worker. She could improve her status, et cetera, et cetera. And he was with her, and the building blew up. There were people in the street in front. So, and if you probably remember the attack, I guess it's about a decade ago, on the Jewish Community Center in Kansas City, where 3 people were killed. I believe it was Kansas City.
JCC, right?
The JCC. I don't think 3 people were killed in the parking lot, I believe, and none of them were Jews. Right. One was a long-term worker, administrator. One was, I think, a grandfather was bringing his grandson to the JCC because he was going to be in a play or on a team or something. So when I say bottom level threat to Jews, Jewish community, Jewish institutions, and those somehow associated with them. And that alone would be worth the government fight, because governments act in some level in loco parentis, to protect protect their citizens. That's why you have laws on child labor. That's why you have laws on clean water, etc. But it's more than just that. And the reason I'm stressing that alone would make it worth fighting is there's some people who get very nervous when you say it's more than just that, as if to say that if it were just an attack on Jews and Jewish community, it wouldn't be worth fighting. I'm not saying that at all. I believe otherwise. But it's more than just that. It's also a threat to democracy. Because if you accept the conspiracy myth, which is the cornerstone of the anti-Semitic stereotype, that the Jews control the media, the banks, the governments, the judiciary, whatever, you've given up on democracy. If I believe one group controls everything, why should I go vote? It doesn't matter. Why should I believe in my voice counts? It doesn't matter. And the corresponding or flip side of that is that the people against whom this hatred is directed are not sure that the government can or will protect them. I mean, we saw that on the campuses, both in the United States and abroad, that the students, the UCLA students were denied entry into the library unless they renounced, their support of Israel, their Jewish identity, however it was phrased. And not only was there no one to protect them, but now UCLA has come out, in the lawsuit, the administration of UCLA is saying, oh, no, we weren't responsible. So you give up on, you can say the university is not going to protect me. And I'm not just UCLA is domestic, but I saw the same thing in countries abroad, in universities or in Europe. So you've given up on democracy. And the third level as a threat to national security and national stability. That bad actors, whether it's Iran, whether it's other countries, whether it's NGOs, whether it's terrorist organizations, whether it's domestic entities, use anti-Semitism because of its age-old nature, because of its malleability, because of its having been used by so many cultures and so many societies as a means, a cornerstone to what they're not, whether you're talking about ancient religions, whether you're talking about political movements, Christianity, Islam, socialism, communism, the pseudoscience of race, et cetera, it becomes this useful tool as a means. Were I to say I'm going to use people's resentment against the bicycle riders to stir up instability in a country or city. Well, today some people hate the bike lanes. So, I had been saying that before October 7th, but since October 7th, it's stronger.
Just a few months ago, you led an initiative to pass global guidelines to combat anti-Semitism, and it was signed in Buenos Aires at the commemoration of the Amia bombing. How did those guidelines come together, and why do you think they are so significant?
They are really significant. We now have 40 signatories, 36 countries and 4 international organizations, I believe. By the way, they're available if you just put in global guidelines to counter, it'll take you straight to the State Department site and you can see them there with all the signatories. There is a Spanish translation because we issued it in Buenos Aires. We have an Arabic translation, and now the Israeli embassy here in Washington has prepared a Hebrew translation. So much of what we do is reactive, and this is proactive. How did they come about? They came about in part because I think it was in January of 2024. I look at my calendar and I see that the Attorney General of Australia is coming to meet with me. And I said, the Attorney General of Australia, Malivala, Attorney General of Australia, what's our connection, And I said, he should be going to see Attorney General Merrick Garland. And they said to me, no, in fact, he's coming directly from a meeting with the Attorney General. So we have the meeting, and he says to me, we are facing a problem in Australia of anti-Semitism. What do you suggest we do? We're thinking about appointing a a special envoy, et cetera, et cetera. I began to talk about best practices. And in my conversation, there are about 18 other countries with special envoys. So I began to some of the things they have said to me, et cetera, et cetera. I realized that this was common wisdom for those of us who are engaged in the fight. Leaders have, you've seen the guidelines, I assume. Leaders have to speak out. Don't politicize, educate, understand what it is, appoint envoys, et cetera, appoint someone who's going to be watching this. And I said, we should begin to draft something. And we could have just put it out as a United States government document. We could have worked on it, gotten it cleared with legal. This had to go, everything comes out of my office has to go through an extensive clearance process because it speaks for the United States government. But I said, no, I want this to be a multilateral document. So first I thought we'd get the 18 countries with special envoys, maybe we'd get all of them. But I have big thinkers in my office and they've said, no, we can do more than that. And you see the list of countries. It's a major diplomatic achievement to get 36 countries, soon to be 38 countries, and 4 international organizations to sign on. And there's still countries coming forward now approaching us, thinking to sign on. It's not passage, it's not a treaty in that such, but it's an official embrace. And when you look at the signatories, it's quite striking. We had other countries calling other countries to marching. In the State Department, our Western WHA, Western Hemisphere office was sending out, was the marching and sending out official notices to a slew of countries in South America saying this is very important to us, get it done. So it's an official document. Now the question is how to use that document in the fight against anti-Semitism. And already countries are beginning to use it, countries are beginning to address it, and we're going to look for more ways to do it. But it's really a historic document in the sense of just a document signed by 40 countries for a small office such as ours, where, it's not so, it's bigger than it's ever been, but it's, I think, a few of 21, 22 people to have accomplished this. Each country had to be, worked through, et cetera. And it's a proactive element. It's not putting out a fire. It's not going to France and saying, you have a problem, or, what are you doing about it? How can we help you address it? But it's saying, here's something that we can do.
Can you give an example of how a particular country is using it and how you might see that would concretely?
I think it's early on, but I think it's stressing the issue that leaders have to speak out. Look at the first one. Leaders should speak out. Now, stakeholder organizations, in other countries can say to their leaders, this just happened. You've got to, you endorse this. You've got to speak out. Don't politicize. If you're a left-leaning government, don't only look for anti-Semitism on the right. If you're a right-leaning government, don't look at it for it on the left. Where you see it, speak out. So it's early. I mean, it's less than a month. It's just a month since Buenos Aires, and I'm going to be in Geneva next week, meeting with a number of the signatories. It was even, by the way, Miguel Moratinos, who is this undersecretary at the UN for the Alliance of Civilization, which is sort of the human rights entity, hailed its release as a very positive and useful element. So we're hoping countries will use it as a tool in their fight against the anti-Semitism.
Was there any effort to reach out to Muslim or Arab nations? I know you were in Saudi Arabia having some discussions. Was there any?
Yeah, we are in conversation with. We are hopeful. It's a longer process, but certainly Muslim majority countries, a number of Muslim majority countries are well aware of this and have indicated that they think it's a very useful document. Whether they'll sign on now, given the Middle East situation, et cetera, or maybe down the line, but we certainly have shared it with them, and they have been very, very supportive in this, because they also recognize that what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews.
Some countries do, right?
Yeah.
Probably some more than others, right?
Right.
So college students are now returning to campuses in the United States and around the world, and already we're seeing protests. Everybody was anticipating and not knowing what level it would actually, but we're already in
Oh,
the
I
very
could have told you it was coming. I could have. You didn't ask me before. I would have said,
okay.
batten down the hatches. It's going to be worse.
So to what extent can these global guidelines be used to combat anti-Semitism on
I have
college?
already met with heads of universities, provosts, chancellors, presidents
In the
abroad,
United States,
and
abroad?
informally in the United States, because that's not part of my remit, and we don't want our, foreign policy getting, but I've met with some. I met informally with the head of a major research university, major, top tier university just a few days ago. And I said, look at these. You can implement these. You speak out. Doesn't matter where it's issue neutral. It's, political neutral. And he was very happy to have them. Um, Companies could adapt them. They can't be used as such, but it's a great checklist, sort of what we can do, data, enforce. That's, you see already universities are saying, I think there was an article in the Times yesterday that universities are recognize that permissiveness doesn't work. And you have laws against things, enforce. I know one university is preparing to send out a message for things: no masking, no middle of the night demonstrations, because they were doing this middle, keeping the students up, no takeover of buildings, oh, no encampments. And then they said this is issue neutral. It can be about the environment, it can be about the sports team, it can be about the Middle East situation. I think universities got hijacked and weren't prepared. You have rules. You have rules that to protect the other students, much less what goes on campus. Look, there's a freedom of speech, but there was this wasn't only a speech element.
And to what extent do you think like the legal route is, enforces one of your guidelines? To what extent the legal route and
I guess it
actions
depends
against
on what the situation is and how it's approached. I mean, that's not for us to decide. The Department of Education has become very active in that. In fact, we had representatives of the Department of Education here in our office yesterday, meeting with the team. I was off at a foreign embassy, in fact, a Middle Eastern embassy, meeting with their ambassador. But just to brief us on what they were doing and how they're approaching it, so we know what's going on in the rest of government. We've met with people from Homeland Security, from the intelligence community. We work in collaboration, not because we get involved in domestic things, but that we should know what's going on in other places and they should know what we're doing. I think it's going to be a very different atmosphere. The universities are going to have to find whether abroad they have different rules on freedom of speech, but the line between enforcement and not curtailing freedom of speech. But freedom of speech doesn't entail going into taking over a university hall and or a building and destroying it, or just taking it over.
It seems that there's been some downplaying on the part of officials, American officials and international as well, of the harm and the threat to Jewish students. So this must be something that you think about a lot. To what extent do you think this has really been harmful for Jewish students in the United States and around the world?
It's made their lives more difficult. They go 4 years of university, you get an education, but you also have that university experience. And they're now choosing universities based on how comfortable will I be there. They're deciding whether to put the mezuzah on their dorm door on the doorpost outside, or to move it inside. Outside I feel protected. There are other people there. Do I want everybody to know that a Jew lives in this building? I don't know if this is true, and you'd have to check it out. I wasn't told by Hillel itself. But more and more students are indicating, yes, they want a Jewish roommate. Whereas before the tendency was, no, I want to learn. I want to expose to other cultures. Now maybe I don't want to take the issue into my dorm room, which is my home. So I fear some more students are feeling much more identified and identifiable, and identifying, I guess would be the way to put it. But I also worry about those students who don't have that strong identity or even that budding identity, and who are just gonna, go, to borrow a term from another form of discrimination, into the closet. I am old enough to remember when you played down your identity and when you celebrated your identity. Much of the change, as you know, came about in the 70s. In part, Jewish students influenced by Black students on campus, as they demanded Black studies, and Jews said, yes, we want that too, but to go into the closet is not a good thing.
So you and many others have long contended that anti-Israel activity is not necessarily anti-Semitism, but it's really hard not to see more of a blurring of these lines
Yes,
post
yes,
October
yes.
7th.
Look, criticism of Israeli policy is not anti-Semitism. If that were the case, the 100,000 people who are going to be on the streets Saturday night would be in Tel Aviv or wherever in the Merkaz, would be anti-Semitic, and that, of course, is ridiculous. But much of it has morphed. I'm often asked by journalists, by media people, not just, the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And I remember at one point I had a conversation with David Remnick back in November, and I went through a long thing of threading the needle. And now I just say, you know what? You're asking the wrong person. Go ask the person who just defaced, I read it this morning, was it the Holocaust Memorial in Paris? No, that was last week. I forget which one. With free Gaza on it. Go ask the person who firebombed the synagogue in Montreal. Go ask a person who, in Michigan, they have, a protest in front of Hillel. Go ask the person who was walking across Times Square with the yarmulke and got hassled and harassed. Go ask the protesters who rode through Golders Green in UK, kill the Jews and screw their wives, or whatever they said. They're making the connection. But to be critical of Israeli policy, to say that that's anti-Semitism, that would Israel. One of the things, amongst the things that ties us to Israel, beyond the Zionism and Jewish state and all that, is it's a democracy. It shares those American values. So, I think it's very important to make the differentiation, because if you don't, then when it's a real act of anti-Semitism, they say, oh, everything is anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. So how do you explain the fact that a discussion of Israeli policy has so often now morphed into anti-Semitism? How do you explain that?
Sometimes it's ignorance. Sometimes the criticism of Israel is a cover for the anti-Semitism. Like the anti-Semite knows, it's not, I don't want to, if I attack Jews, that's seen as anti-Semitism, but attack Israel, that's okay. And sometimes it's vice versa. Who appears? Someone in Colombia shared me their analysis. They said, this is anti-American, anti-capitalist, anti-democracy, and you go after the country that appears to be the perfect client state of democracy, Israel. You go after the group that appears, though many, it's not true, but that may be cited as most having benefited from democracy. So it's a useful way. It's been normalized. That's what, when I talked about early on in our conversation about the tsunami of anti-Semitism, it's that normalization thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, you were involved in developing the Biden administration's national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. And in the end, there are several definitions of anti-Semitism in there. And of course, there has been a big debate about adapting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition. So do you think that, and that definition is in the guide, the global
that
guideline?
Definition, national strategy, which by the way is 60 pages, and most people have read that one paragraph and ignored the 60 pages of recommendations. 27 different agencies took part in it. So I bristle when people only see that. Someone asked me recently in a podcast, I said, well, what do you think of the recommendations of the Department of Education? Oh, I didn't look at it. What do you think of the recommendations of the Department of Agriculture? Department of Agriculture said we run 4-H groups in rural areas, many of which have no Jewish. So these kids know nothing about Jews. How do we educate about Jews to inoculate them against anti-Semitism? Have you looked, but on the definitional thing, it acknowledged that the IRA definition is something enthusiastically embraced certainly by the State Department, and it acknowledged one other definition. That other definition is a strict nexus definition, strictly an American definition. It talks about the nexus between politics, anti-Semitism, American politics. And then there are other, there's some people cite other definitions. None of them, the IRA definition has been adopted by 40 countries, hundreds of soccer teams, et cetera, and sports teams and corporations. It's a very useful document as a guidance. It's not, we don't use it as law but as guidance, it's a very useful document. And I find the fight against it having political undertones, which have nothing to do with the definition, but use the definition to make that political fight.
So you don't think the debate over the definition affects the ability to actually fight anti-Semitism at all?
I think the debate over the definition is a great absorption of people's energies. I'm not saying that that the debate doesn't go on, but every minute that I'm involved in talking about the debate is a minute that it could be used to actually fighting the anti-Semitism.
Among all the horrors of October 7th, the denialism of the rape, torture, and other forms of sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas and beyond seems especially egregious. How did your previous dealings with Holocaust denial prepare you to focus on this issue?
Tremendously. And in fact, I think I wasn't in office more than 2 weeks when my deputy came in to share something, and he stopped, and he began to describe an incident, and I said, "Oh, I can tell you." He said, "How do you know?" I said, "I've been dealing with this, for 30 years." I talk about, and you probably know this, softcore denial and hardcore denial. Hardcore denial, and I use softcore and hardcore because we usually talk about pornography, and Holocaust denial is the pornographication of, if there's such a word, of history. Hardcore denial is what I fought in court. Softcore denial, it's not so bad. Why are you talking about it? Why we're talking about it? Because 1 out of every 3 Jews alive on the face of the earth was murdered. And for other reasons as well. But if that is not enough, it made me more sensitive to the nuances of anti-Semitism, because Holocaust denial is not but a form of anti-Semitism. It's a way of saying Jews made this up, Jews lie about this. Why did they do this? Oh, to get reparations money, which is part of the anti-Semitic stereotype, to get a state, even though that's not the case, but many Jews believe that, that the two are solely with the soul connection. And it shows how conniving they are. They made a country take responsibility for something when they didn't really do it. So at its heart, it uses all the anti-Semitic stereotypes. And having seen that and been attuned to the nuances of it was a sad but useful preparation.
And specifically on the sexual violence, there are many efforts underway now to bring attention to this issue and hold Hamas accountable. There's Sheryl Sandberg's, the movie that she's involved with, Screams Before Silence.
It's a
Hadassah.
powerful.
Yeah, there's Hadassah's and the Silence. There's an I Believe Israeli Women global movement that's really taking hold around the world. There's an effort among
Well, you know that Ambassador Michelle Taylor, the American ambassador at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, she and I co-authored an op-ed in The Guardian in, I believe it was January, on this issue. And we said, when there were other instances of attacks on women, Yazidi women, a genocide, horrific. Boko Haram, Bring Back Our Girls. Even the brave Iranian women who had the chutzpah, audacity to take off their head coverings. The human rights world, the world of women feminist organizations went wild, as they should have. And I cheered them on and was part of that. When this happened, well, let's see the victims, what we don't know, we have to wait, we have to do, we don't doubt, we don't, all sorts of bad, which, excuses. And Michelle Taylor and I said, what's the difference here? The only difference is that the perception is that these were all Jewish women. They weren't. There were Muslim women who were raped. There were foreign visitors and foreign workers, and people would come for the rave or vacation. But the perception is that these were Jewish women. So, and we called that anti-Semitism. And we weren't sure where to place it, and I said, let's place it in the Guardian. And subsequent to that, I had a meeting with the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. And I said to someone there, an editor said to us after we finished, why didn't you give it to us? I said, because your readers would have nodded in agreement, and the readers of the Guardian were more likely to say, I hadn't thought about it. You know, they were or to get rankled by it. And that's what we wanted. So to my mind, the reaction, and in fact, there was a screening of portions of Cheryl's film. Cheryl was there and she spoke, as was a survivor, one of the hostages released. Were you at the White House when?
No, I watched it.
But
Yeah.
you had there were Hadassah folks there.
Yes, there were some Hadassah folks.
Yes, there were, because I spoke with them. A meeting on this, and it was clear, you know, and Cheryl and I have spoken a lot about it, that this is anti-Semitism.
So of course, it's hard to know the future of your position, right? No matter who wins the election,
Right.
There's going to be a new administration. So what's your advice to the next president of the United States to really continue to fight anti-Semitism?
Take this issue, I mean, I don't have to give this advice to this administration because they clearly have done that. Take this issue seriously. Appoint someone who understands the issue and knows the issue, cares about the issue, which my predecessors have been great. They've been so helpful to me in so many different ways. I'm the first one who comes in with a background in it, and I think that that's very important. And recognize, going back maybe to begin where we ended, recognize that this is a threat not just to the welfare of the Jewish community, but it's a threat to democracy and it's a threat to national stability. And see it as a global threat. See it as something that, I was meeting with one of the intelligence organizations and talking to them about, what is anti-Semitism, et cetera. And I said, think of it as the flashing amber yellow light that and as you get to that corner, you want to get through the intersection because, it's a long intersection, or you just want to get through it. And the light is, as you get closer, we imagine the light begins to flash stronger. Don't. Think of anti-Semitism as flashing amber light. The red light may not be more anti-Semitism, but it will be bad stuff. It will be anti-democratic. It will be anti-national stability. It will be bad. It will come from bad actors. Take it seriously.